Tennessee may look peaceful, but behind that calm lies some of the state's darkest crimes, carried out by women no one ever expected to kill. Blood-soaked bedrooms, children left to die in silence, police officers struck down on the highway. Each case ended with life sentences and decades behind bars. Yet the shadow of these murders still looms over Tennessee, a reminder that even the most ordinary lives can hide extraordinary darkness. This is Tennessee's most evil female killers, shocking murders, and true crime cases. Welcome back to Justice Reversed, where real crimes meet real justice. Number 1. Fallon Lynn Tallent. It started like many reckless crimes do, fast, fueled by drugs, and desperate to avoid arrest. But this one ended with 2 officers dead and a 21-year-old woman locked away for over a century. On July 9, 2003, Fallon Lynn Tallent, high on crack cocaine after a 7-day binge, led police on a high-speed chase that stretched from Knoxville to Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Hours earlier, she'd traded drugs for a stolen Mercedes, then drove through the night with her passenger, Dorothy Cash, smoking crack and evading police. By morning, Knoxville officer Blake Barham spotted the car. When he approached, Tallent reversed into his cruiser and fled, igniting a pursuit through residential streets at nearly 70 miles per hour. Barham's supervisor called off the chase, but Tallent wasn't done. She turned onto Interstate 40, speeding west toward Nashville. Eyewitnesses reported the vehicle moving at up to 130 kph, with Tallent later admitting, "I was flying. I had a crack pipe in one hand and a steering wheel in the other." As they neared Mount Juliet, law enforcement scrambled to stop the car. Sergeant Jerry Mundy of Mount Juliet Police and Deputy John Musis from Wilson County responded by deploying spike strips at exit 226. But Tallent, who had previously encountered such tactics in a March 2003 chase, was prepared. She warned Cash to look for spike strips, and as they neared the officers, she made a sharp, deliberate turn. Tallent struck Sergeant Mundy first, then Deputy Musi. The impact was so violent that their bodies were thrown over 270 feet. Neither officer survived. There were no brake marks at the scene. Tallent was arrested immediately. At trial, prosecutors argued her actions were premeditated, not a panicked mistake, but a calculated decision to kill rather than be caught. She had proposed to do anything, even kill, to get away, one prosecutor said. The jury agreed. On July 1, 2004, Tallent was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She showed no emotion as Judge John Wooden handed down 2 consecutive life sentences. She will not be eligible for parole for 102 years. The courtroom was filled with grief. Bonnie Anderson, Musisi's daughter, said, "She'll never hurt anybody again," describing Tallent's face as blank, cold. Sergeant Mundy's widow, Trish, committed to attending every court hearing, a vow rooted in pain and justice. Though Tallent appealed her conviction, arguing ineffective counsel and mental health concerns, all efforts were denied. Today, she remains incarcerated at the Women's Therapeutic Residential Center in Haining, Tennessee. The case sparked widespread discussion about addiction, criminal justice, and the dangers of high-speed police pursuits. As a result, spike strip deployment protocols were reviewed across the state. Crimes like this remind us never underestimate how addiction impairs judgment and morality. Fleeing police at high speeds turns recklessness into murder. Law enforcement interventions can carry fatal risks, even for those trying to protect others. Fallon Tallent's name may fade, but for 2 families in Tennessee, her split-second decision changed everything. And it raises one haunting question: what is the true cost of trying to outrun justice? Before we continue, if this case shakes you, press hype. Stand with us, break silence, and let justice roar louder than the voices once erased. Number 2. Noura Jackson. She was young, wealthy, and reckless. But when her mother was found stabbed 50 times inside their Memphis home, suspicion quickly turned inward, toward the daughter she raised alone. Noura Grace Jackson was just 18 on June 5, 2005, when her life collided with one of Tennessee's most shocking murder cases. Her mother, Jennifer Jackson, a respected bond trader and devoted athlete, was discovered dead on the floor of her bedroom, her body covered in blood and her face mutilated by repeated knife wounds. Investigators called it a rage killing. A wicker basket placed over her head suggested a disturbing final act. The hours before the murder painted a troubling picture. Noura had been out drinking and partying. Her Her phone records went silent between 1 and 3 a.m., the window when police believe the murder occurred. A cut on her hand, captured by Walgreens surveillance cameras as she purchased hydrogen peroxide and bandages at 4 a.m., raised further suspicion. When she returned home later, she claimed to find her mother's body, running to a neighbor before calling 911. Detectives focused on motive. Prosecutors argued Jennifer was preparing to send her daughter to boarding school, clashing with Noura's hard-partying lifestyle. They also pointed to financial motives. Noura stood to inherit her late father's estate, worth over $1.4 million, if acquitted. An uncle testified that she had recently discussed her mother's assets, while family members claimed her alibi was unconvincing. On September 29, 2005, Noura was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began in February 2009 and drew national media attention. More than 40 witnesses and nearly 400 exhibits were presented, yet no DNA evidence directly tied her to the crime. The jury ultimately rejected premeditation, but convicted her of second-degree murder. Judge Christopher Kraft, delivering a sentence of 20 years and 9 months, declared, "She killed the only person who really loved her." Noura showed little visible emotion as she stood in court, her once defiant presence subdued, her name echoing across headlines in true crime YouTube compilations and network documentaries, but her legal battle did not end there. In 2014, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned her conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct and withheld evidence. To avoid a retrial, Noura entered an Alford plea to voluntary manslaughter in 2015. She was released in 2016 after serving 11 years. The case divided opinion. Some relatives, including Jennifer's sisters, insisted justice had been served, while others criticized the system for convicting without direct forensic evidence. Noura's later arrest on drug charges in 2022 reignited public debate, fueling viral discussions on whether justice had truly been reached. From this case emerge sobering lessons. Unresolved family conflict can escalate into unthinkable tragedy. Circumstantial evidence can dictate life-altering verdicts, and justice is only as strong as the integrity of its process. In the end, the Noura Jackson story reminds us that truth inside a courtroom can be elusive, and families can be left with wounds that never heal. Number 3. Lindsey Lowe. She wore a bridesmaid dress 2 days before giving birth. No one noticed she was pregnant. No nursery, no diapers, no plan. Only silence and then death. Lindsey Lowe, 25, lived with her parents and sister in a conservative Christian household in Hendersonville, Tennessee. On the night of September 12, 2011, alone in her family's bathroom, she gave birth to twin boys. Her confession to police revealed what happened next. She placed her hand over each newborn's mouth to stifle their cries, afraid her parents would hear. One by one, the babies stopped breathing. She wrapped their bodies in towels and laid them in a laundry basket next to her bed. On September 14, her mother, cleaning Lindsey's room, found one of the infants cold and lifeless. Her father, Mark Lowe, contacted a lawyer and a pastor before calling police. When Detective Steve Mallock picked Lindsey up from work that afternoon, she confessed. Police returned to the house and discovered the second baby, still in the basket beneath a blood-soaked sheet. The community was stunned. Prosecutors argued she'd hidden the pregnancy to avoid shaming her family or jeopardizing her engagement. They presented internet searches on her phone, how to induce labor, and disturbing pornography involving pregnant women as signs of premeditation. Medical examiners confirmed both babies were healthy and alive at birth. The defense offered a different picture. Lindsey, they said, suffered from major depression and dissociative disorder. She'd experienced shock and blood loss from the unassisted birth and could not fully comprehend her actions. Psychiatric evaluations from both sides agreed she had depression, though they differed on whether she was capable of premeditation. The trial lasted less than 2 weeks. On March 19, 2013, the jury found her guilty of felony and premeditated first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. Judge D. David Gay sentenced her to life in prison plus 56 years. "You were not truthful," he told her. "You were selfish." But the case didn't end there. In 2022, a post-conviction petition revealed one juror had lied under oath about her bias, triggering the conviction to be overturned. Lindsey was released on bond. By June 2024, however, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals reversed that decision, stating the juror was not biased. Her conviction was reinstated. She now awaits further proceedings, once again free on bond. This case leaves behind more than legal documents. It leaves hard lessons. Mental illness does not erase consequences, but it demands humane consideration. Family silence can mask dangerous secrets. Even well-educated, seemingly stable individuals can spiral under pressure and shame. In court, Lindsey sat still as her sentence was read. Her family wept. There were no protests outside, but online the case split opinions. Some called her a monster, others a victim of untreated mental illness. 2 lives ended before they began, and 1 life continues, burdened by silence, judged by the law, and defined by a night no one heard. Number 4. Kimberly Cunningham. In Tennessee's Smoky Mountain foothills, a mother's heartbreak turned into an explosive act of violence. What unfolded forced jurors and the public to confront an impossible question: justice or vengeance? Kimberly E. Cunningham, 31 years old, had known Coy Calloway Hundley for nearly 2 decades. He was her brother-in-law, the man her children called Uncle. In October 2003, her world collapsed when her youngest daughter, Amanda, disclosed she had been raped by Hundley years earlier, beginning at age 9. Kimberly's son, Shane, revealed he, too, had been molested by Hundley's eldest son. On October 6, Amanda broke down and revealed the full truth. Kimberly later testified she could not erase her daughter's words from her mind. The following morning, she drove to Slide Lock Tool Company in Alcoa, Tennessee, where Hundley worked. Witnesses recalled her summoning him outside. Moments later, shots rang out. Hundley collapsed, pleading, "Don't do this," as Kimberly emptied her revolver, reloaded, and fired again. 8 shots total, 4 to the head. She then drove calmly to the sheriff's department and surrendered. Investigators found her dazed and repeating, "He assaulted my baby." Officers described her as compliant but deeply distraught. Prosecutors, however, emphasized the brutality of reloading and shooting again. Assistant District Attorney Robert Hedrick argued, "She went to his workplace armed and planning to kill." The April 2005 trial riveted Knoxville. After 14 hours of deliberation, jurors acquitted her of first-degree murder but deadlocked on second-degree charges. A retrial followed that October. In tearful testimony, Kimberly told the jury, "I lost myself. I don't remember pulling the trigger." Her defense attorney, Bruce Poston, urged the jury to see the act as one of passion, not premeditation. Jurors ultimately convicted her of voluntary manslaughter. Judge Kelly Thomas acknowledged her anguish but said, "You shot Mr. Hundley by the car, and while he was crawling you reloaded and shot him 3 times in the head." In December 2005, she was sentenced to 4 years in prison, later reduced on appeal to 6 months. Hundley's mother, Eveline, rejected Kimberly's claims, stating, "She killed my son in cold blood. He wasn't guilty of what she said. They had no proof whatsoever." Meanwhile, Kimberly's youngest sister testified that she was deeply remorseful and feared for her children's future. The case split Knoxville and drew national media coverage, raising the question, what would you do if you believed your child had been raped? Jurors admitted their struggle was not over guilt, but over how to balance the law with raw human instinct. From this tragedy come sobering lessons. Silence allows abuse to fester. Children must be heard the first time. Vigilante justice, no matter the pain, brings its own destruction. And the legal system, however flawed, remains the only path that prevents chaos. Justice cannot undo the pain or resurrect the dead. It can only remind us that in moments of unbearable rage, choices define legacies that last far longer than anger. And number 5, Jennifer Forsyth, Hyatte. The plan wasn't whispered in prison hallways. It was forged in obsession, written in a diary, and executed in daylight, with bullets, blood, and a vow stronger than parole. Jennifer Forsyth Hyatte was once a nurse at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tennessee. That's where she met inmate George Hyatte, a career criminal with a string of robbery convictions. She smuggled food to him, got fired in 2004, and later married him in May 2005, still serving time. But Jennifer didn't want conjugal visits. She wanted freedom. Not just his, but theirs. Together. On August 9, 2005, outside the Roane County Courthouse, George had just pleaded guilty to robbery. As two correctional officers, Wayne Cotton Morgan and Larry Harris, escorted him back to the transport van, Jennifer pulled up in a Ford Explorer. She jumped out with a handgun. "Shoot him!" George allegedly shouted. Jennifer obeyed. Officer Morgan was shot 3 times in the abdomen. Officer Harris was also hit. Morgan later died at the hospital. Jennifer was wounded in the leg during the chaos, but still managed to flee with George. What followed was a multi-state manhunt that gripped the country. The couple abandoned the Ford, switched to a stolen gold van, and drove north. Surveillance footage later showed them buying a hacksaw in Kentucky, possibly to remove George's restraints. They checked into an Econo lodge under fake names. Jennifer had dyed her hair, but a cab driver named Mike Wagers, who had driven them to Columbus, Ohio, recognized their faces from the news. His tip led federal marshals straight to room 236B at the America's Best Value Inn. They surrendered quietly. Inside the room were blood traces, weapons, and Jennifer's diary, titled A Modern-Day Bonnie and Clyde. In it, she described George as her soulmate. 2 halves of the same soul, she wrote. Prosecutors later confirmed she had asked her father, a former police officer, about getting a handcuff key weeks before the shooting. On September 17, 2007, Jennifer pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, attempted murder, and facilitating escape. She received life without parole. In court, she said little. Officer Morgan's son, Dennis, addressed her directly. "Your choice has left my sister and me without a father." Dean Harris, wife of the surviving officer, asked, "Was 36 hours worth it?" The courtroom was packed. Outside, crowds had jeered their return to Tennessee. Inside, Morgan's widow said simply, "We just hope she meant she was sorry." From this case, 3 hard truths emerge. Emotional vulnerability can override professional duty, even in high secretary roles. Every inmate transport is a moment of risk. Fantasies of love and rebellion can justify unspeakable violence in a twisted mind. Jennifer Hyatte now spends her days in the Tennessee prison for women. Her husband, also convicted, remains behind bars. Their escape lasted less than 2 days. The consequences will last forever. When love turns into a weapon, the collateral damage is measured not in years, but in funerals. Number 6. Tasha Bates. Sometimes it's not what's seen, but what's ignored that kills. The cluttered trailer, the broken routines, the rising summer heat, none of it mattered until 2 boys never got back up. On June 28, 2012, in Bradley County, Tennessee, Tasha Bates claimed her sons, Leland, 5, and River, 3, had been playing outside while she cleaned. She said she found them unresponsive in the yard after 45 minutes. But investigators quickly found cracks in her story. The slip knife in the yard was bone dry. There were no wet footprints. Bates later admitted they were found inside her car, parked in the sun, windows up, temperatures outside reaching 101 degrees. She didn't call 911. She didn't knock on a neighbor's door. Instead, she loaded the boys into her car again and drove to her father's house. There, her father made the emergency call and tried CPR. River died soon after. Leland died later in the hospital. 1 week later, police conducted a test inside her vehicle. Within minutes, interior temperatures soared to 129 DEGF. Autopsy results showed the boys' core body temperatures exceeded 105 DEGF. Rivers reached 109 DEGF, a fatal level of hyperthermia. Prosecutor Stephen Hatchett described the case bluntly. "No good comes of this. 2 beautiful boys are dead." The horror didn't stop there. Officers searching Bates' home found meth-making equipment in the garage and in the trash. The house, described as trash-filled and chaotic, tested positive for heroin, meth, and chemicals associated with manufacturing. Her blood and urine showed methamphetamine. In August 2013, Bates stood trial for 2 counts of felony murder, aggravated child neglect, and meth charges. The prosecution emphasized not just the heat, but the chaos, an environment so unstable, so drug-fueled, that tragedy felt inevitable. "She didn't keep her eyes on them because she was high," said one witness. "That's not a mistake. That's abandonment." Her phone, found in the trunk of the car, was working. Claims that it was text-only were false. The prosecution argued this wasn't forgetfulness, it was willful failure. On August 29, a jury convicted Bates on all counts. In November, Judge Amy Reedy handed down 2 consecutive life sentences, calling her a dangerous offender who showed little or no regard for her children. Bates stood silent, no visible emotion, just the sound of a courtroom listening to the weight of final judgment. Family members begged for leniency. Linda Bates, the boy's grandmother, told the judge, "She was never taught to be a mother. She was depressed. She didn't know how to cope." But no one could ignore the suffering of Leland and River. This case leaves behind brutal truths. Drug use doesn't just destroy the user, it endangers the helpless. Not acting is often just as deadly as acting with intent. A home filled with chemicals isn't just unstable, it's a crime scene waiting to happen. Neglect isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a closed car door, a silenced phone, and a mother too far gone to notice her sons were dying. Number 7. Raynella Dossett, Leath. She lived among Tennessee's rolling hills, respected and untouchable. Yet behind closed doors, a trail of deaths followed her, each one raising the same question: coincidence or calculated design? Raynella, born in 1948, first entered the public eye as the wife of Knox County District Attorney Ed Dossett. When Ed was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the early 1990s, tragedy seemed inevitable. In 1992, he was found dead in the couple's corral, his death ruled an accident caused by trampling cattle. But later evidence told a more sinister story. A new medical examiner revealed that Ed's body contained extraordinarily high levels of morphine, far too much for survival. Suspicion fell on his wife, but no immediate charges were brought. 6 months after Ed's death, Raynella married again, this time to local barber David Leath. Their marriage outwardly appeared stable, but in 1995, her violent side emerged. She lured Steve Walker, the husband of Ed's mistress, to her farm under the pretense of finding papers. Instead, she opened fire. He fled for his life and later admitted he slept with a gun by his side, fearing her return. Raynella received probation, her record later wiped clean. By the early 2000s, David's health declined rapidly. He suffered hallucinations, memory loss, and paranoia. His neurologist testified that David once told him, "I think my wife is trying to kill me, she's trying to suffocate me." On March 13, 2003, David was found dead in his bedroom. Raynella called 911 to report a suicide, but forensic evidence said otherwise. He had been drugged and shot 3 times in the head, an act no medical examiner believed he could have inflicted on himself. In 2006, Raynella was indicted for David's murder and for overdosing Ed. The first trial in 2009 ended with a hung jury, but in 2010, she was convicted of first-degree murder in David's death. Judge Richard Baumgartner handed her a sentence of 51 years to life. Standing before the court, her silver hair tied neatly, she showed no outward reaction. Justice, however, unraveled once more. Judge Baumgartner's own misconduct, illegal use of prescription drugs, led to her conviction being overturned. A third trial in 2017 concluded abruptly when Judge Paul Summers dismissed the case, ruling the state has failed to meet its burden. Raynella walked free, her record cleared. For David's daughter, Cindy Wilkerson, the reversal was devastating. Justice was not delivered because of a technicality, she said, still convinced of Raynella's guilt. Even jurors from the final trial admitted frustration, one saying, "We all believed she was guilty." Yet legally, Raynella emerged untouched, a free woman in the same community where suspicions had once surrounded her. From this case, 3 harsh lessons stand out. Repeated tragedies connected to one person demand scrutiny. Influence and status should never blur accountability, and the failures of the justice system can shatter families, leaving grief unresolved. In the end, the case of Raynella Leath reminds us that courtroom verdicts and ultimate truth do not always align. Sometimes, history is left to carry the unanswered questions. Number 8. Natasha Wallen Cornett. It didn't start with violence, it started with boredom, bad decisions, and a van that needed replacing. What followed would leave 3 people dead and a toddler orphaned, all because of a chance encounter. On April 6, 1997, 6 teenagers from Pikeville, Kentucky, led by 18-year-old Natasha Wallen Cornett, were en route to New Orleans, fleeing a trail of destruction left at a motel the night before. The group had vandalized a room, partied with drugs, and even tried burning 666 into the carpet. The next morning, with 2 handguns and a failing Chevrolet Citation, they stopped at a Greenville, Tennessee rest stop. There, they crossed paths with the Leath family. Vidar Leath, 34, was holding his 2-year-old son Peter when he approached the teens to share his faith. What he didn't know was that one of them had already suggested jacking a better car. In court, prosecutors revealed that Joseph Risner pulled a gun and ordered the family into their van. Delphina Leath tried to calm her children by singing softly. It was the last peaceful sound any of them would hear. The family was driven to Payne Hollow Lane, a remote stretch of road. There they were forced out of the vehicle and lined up near a drainage ditch. The first shot came from 14-year-old Jason Bryant. Then more gunshots. Vida was shot 6 times, Delphina 8. Tabitha was struck once in the head. Peter, the youngest, survived but was left permanently blind in one eye. One group member later said they were still alive, so Jason shot again. If that wasn't enough, the teams drove over the victims as they fled the scene in the stolen van. The group's plan to escape to New Orleans unraveled fast. 2 days later, Mexican police stopped them at the border for lacking documents. Inside the van were bloodied razors, occult books, and the Leath's belongings. U.S. Customs took them into custody. Media attention immediately focused on Natasha Cornett, a gothic teen with a past of abuse, untreated bipolar disorder, and self-harm. Her mugshot appeared on front pages with labels like "Daughter of Satan." In a controversial defense strategy, her lawyer had instructed her to play into the satanic narrative, something Cornett would later call a betrayal. "That wasn't who I was," she said. Despite no physical evidence linking Cornett to the trigger, under Tennessee law, she was equally culpable. To avoid the death penalty, all 6 pleaded guilty in 1998. Cornett received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. In court, she stood motionless, eyes forward, betraying no emotion. Peter Leath, now grown, was raised by relatives in Sweden. "He knows everything," one family friend said, "but he lives quietly." This case teaches painful truths. Groupthink among disturbed youth can escalate into collective destruction. One gun in the wrong hands is all it takes to erase a family. Ignored mental illness isn't harmless. Sometimes it finds others just as broken. Sometimes the people we fear aren't monsters, they're kids no one paid attention to until it was far too late. Number 9. Mary Carol Winkler. Behind the walls of a Tennessee parsonage, a shocking crime unfolded, one that shattered a congregation and placed a preacher's wife at the center of a national spectacle. Mary Carol Winkler, born in 1973, was just 32 years old when she killed her husband, Matthew Winkler, the popular pulpit minister at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Their marriage, seen as a model union within the church, hid layers of conflict and abuse that would only be revealed after blood stained their family home. On the morning of March 22, 2006, Matthew was found in bed, shot in the back with a 12-gauge shotgun. Mary admitted retrieving the weapon, but claimed she had no memory of pulling the trigger. Matthew's last word was a desperate question, "Why?" To which Mary whispered, "I'm sorry, I love you," before leaving him to die. The phone line unplugged beside the bed. She then fled with their 3 daughters, ages 8, 6, and 1, driving across state lines to Orange Beach, Alabama, where she was arrested the next day. Investigators uncovered troubling details. Mary confessed to being overwhelmed by Matthew's constant criticism and controlling behavior. In her testimony, she described years of abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual. "He kicked me, pushed me, and used his belt," she said, adding that he forced her to wear humiliating costumes and view pornography. She also alleged he once suffocated their daughters to keep them quiet. Alongside this, financial troubles weighed heavily. She had been caught in a fraudulent check-kiting scheme linked to a Nigerian lottery scam, losing over $17,000. Bankers demanded resolution by March 22, the very day of the killing, and Mary feared Matthew would soon uncover her secret. Charged with first-degree murder, Mary faced trial in 2007. The prosecution pressed for premeditation, citing her confession that thoughts of killing had crossed her mind and the unplugged phone as evidence she prevented Matthew from calling for help. The defense countered that she snapped under years of abuse and pressure, her actions fueled by trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. The jury delivered a stunning verdict, voluntary manslaughter. Mary was sentenced to 210 days in prison with credit for 5 months already served and an additional 60 days in a mental health facility. In total, she spent just 7 months in custody before regaining her freedom. In court, Mary appeared subdued, dressed modestly, her voice steady but often breaking as she spoke of her pain. Matthew's mother, Diane Winkler, lashed out during sentencing, accusing her of destroying her son's reputation and showing no remorse. Yet in 2008, Mary regained full custody of her daughters, a decision that fueled public debate. This case carried sobering lessons. Silence about abuse allows cycles of violence to thrive, hidden financial stress can escalate to tragedy, and courtroom outcomes often spark questions about fairness and gender bias. The story of Mary Winkler lingers as a reminder that behind the image of perfection, private battles can end in irreversible destruction, and justice, in the eyes of many, may never feel complete. Number 10. Jennifer Womac. The quiet of rural Tennessee was broken by a murder so intimate it stunned even seasoned investigators. A daughter conspiring to end the life of her own father. Jennifer Lee Womac, born in 1973, was 36 when she orchestrated the killing of her father, 66-year-old Grady Lake Nichols, Jr., in Meigs County. To friends and neighbors, she appeared as an ordinary woman. But behind that facade, greed and cold calculation drove her to plan her father's death for financial gain. On September 19, 2009, she set the plan in motion. Womac recruited 46-year-old Louis Landers, promising him part of her inheritance if he carried out the killing. That morning, she drove Landers to her father's home, then went shopping with her stepmother to create an alibi. As she browsed store aisles, her father sat unsuspecting on his porch. Landers approached, pretending to be a lost hunter, then raised a .410 gauge shotgun and fired. Nichols fell where he sat, mortally wounded. His home turned into a crime scene of betrayal. Later that day, Womac returned with her stepmother, feigning shock at the sight of her father's body, and dialing 911. But investigators quickly unraveled the deception. Within days, Landers was arrested and confessed, implicating Womac as the mastermind. His cooperation provided damning evidence. Authorities wired him during a meeting with Womac, capturing her chilling words about the inheritance. "I may have to filter it to you really slowly, but I promise you that you'll get every penny." 6 days after her father's funeral, Womac was arrested. She had mourned publicly at the graveside, standing among family members, even as she carried the secret of arranging his death. The betrayal was almost too much for the community to comprehend. Prosecutors charged her with capital murder, pointing to clear premeditation. Womac, they argued, had carefully created an alibi, arranged the killing, and discussed payment after the act. The case was sent to the Meigs County grand jury. Facing overwhelming evidence, including the wire recordings, Womac ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. On February 2, 2012, Jennifer Womac and Louis Landers were both sentenced to 40 years in prison. In court, Womac appeared subdued, her face pale and expressionless as the sentence was read. The courtroom remained tense, the gravity of a daughter's betrayal weighing heavily on all present. The crime left an enduring scar. Relatives, particularly her stepmother who had accompanied her that morning, were left to grapple with grief compounded by deceit. The community was left questioning how greed could override even the most sacred family bonds. From this case come urgent reminders. Unchecked greed can push people toward unimaginable acts. Manipulation often hides in plain sight behind familiar faces, and carefully built alibis can delay, but rarely defeat justice. The story of Jennifer Womac underscores that betrayal within a family can be the deepest wound of all, and that justice, though slow, will find its way to the guilty. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks like a daughter, a mother, or a wife. And when it hides inside the people we trust, the betrayal is far more terrifying than the crime itself. Tonight you've seen Tennessee's most shocking female killers, but the question is, how many more stories like these are still waiting to be uncovered? How many secrets sit in small towns, hidden behind locked doors, only revealed when it's too late? If you want to be the first to discover the next case, subscribe to Justice Reversed and ring the bell. Each week we bring you the darkest truths America has tried to forget. Because in true crime, justice doesn't end with a verdict. Sometimes it begins with asking the question no one dares to speak.